Good evening, Murray. How are you doing this evening?
Oh, I'm fine.
All
I
right.
more about Cedar Springs than I ever knew before.
Yeah. Well, tonight, Murray and I are going to continue our conversation about histories of other ski resorts in the Hockley Valley. On our last episode, we talked about Twin Horse, which is up here in the upper right corner. So tonight, we're going to move on down the fourth line, and we're going to be looking at Cedar Springs / Cedar Highlands. And I thought, Murray, the first thing we would do is I would show you a brief history, and I'll read it to you because it's probably hard.
Yeah, my eyes are not the best.
Yep. So it says a brief history of our club started in 1935. Cedar Springs Ski Club Incorporated once boasted the second largest membership, over 2,000, in the 24-member Southern Ontario ski zone. Back then, we had our own facilities in Burlington, which included a few ski runs as well as an 85-foot ski jump on site. Not a lot of people owned cars in those days, so the ski club ran chartered bus service out of the old bus terminal in Hamilton. To get to the terminal from any part of the city, you had to carry your skis on the streetcars. In 1948, with a steadily growing membership and a quest for a ski train that was more challenging, the ski club directors purchased property in Hockley Valley near Orangeville and created a second skiing destination for club members. For over 20 years, the club operated both ski hills until the 1970-71, when it was decided that the access fee to the Burlington location was no longer worth paying because the majority of the members were using the Hockley Valley facilities. For those members of the club who called the Burlington area home, traveling to and from Hockley Valley each weekend wasn't very feasible. In order to accommodate their desire for a cost-efficient way to ski throughout the winter, Cedar Springs Ski Club Incorporated, Burlington, officially became a traveling ski club, which it is today. So that's the history that they have on here. So it works out pretty good because you and I were going to kind of talk about, the 60 to 80, 1960, 1980 time frame. And so I would imagine, I guess my first question to you is, do you ever remember, as you remember Cedar Springs, Cedar Highland, do you remember, was it actually called Cedar Springs first in Hockley Valley and then it changed names? Or do you recall the name change, or was it one name all the time?
Well, yeah, it was Cedar Springs for a number of years. And as part of the trend in ski resorts in Southern Ontario to end up or to make enough money to keep it going, private clubs were happening, and Cedar Springs became Cedar Highlands. I don't know all of the nuts and bolts of that, but it was something to do with getting new members, and the name change. Cedar Highlands was a lot more sexy than Cedar Springs because it suggested a ski hill. And the same with Valley Shoes. It was Valley Shoes because it was a valley. So the change I don't remember. I'm quite interested in the fact that it went back that far. I was going to talk to you tonight about what I know about, or what I'm surmising about, the Prid family being involved in the ski club. I don't know how far back they go, but I know Doug Prid was a member of Cedar Springs Ski Club before when Hearst happened. But I mean, I only landed there in 1960, and I don't know much about that time frame until, shortly after that.
Yeah, and just for anybody that was that hasn't seen our episode on Twin Horse, so Doug Frid was the owner of Twin Horse, and so what Murray was saying is that at one point he was probably a member of the Cedar Springs Cedar Highland Club, and then he ventured off from there to create his own ski resort / club of Twin Horse. So but you're not exactly sure of his relationship with Cedar Highlands / Cedar Springs.
Well, my guess is Doug's relationship was with Cedar Springs, not Cedar Highlands,
Okay.
because Doug and Cedar Springs parted ways way back before we turned up in the valley in 1960, because for some reason, I don't know that reason, um, somehow Doug, through, I think with help from his father, who was well off, uh, they bought the part of the other side of Kate's Peak, which is just over the hill from Cedar Springs. And Doug, got his own ski resort, and he parted ways with Cedar Highlands. I would say probably with not a whole lot of good vibes. Again, I just heard that hearsay. So he parted ways, and Cedar Highlands was sometime later, a number of years after Twin Hearts was started, after Valley Sis was started, etc. I could go on.
Yeah. So do you remember your first recollection of we'll just call it the Cedar Springs / Highlands ski resort? Was all this developed, or what, or did this kind of evolve?
No, the only thing was the little rudimentary chalet at the bottom of the hill, just a small building with a,
So we talking down here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right at the base of Kate's Peak, because the space was limited in that little valley. And there was a rope tow, right up to the top of the hill, probably a 2-stage rope tow.
Now, when you say up,
an old trucker car.
When you say up to the top of the hill towards Kate's Peak, or over this way?
No, that's it right there.
Okay.
South. So the hills face north. It was really important to have your hills, out of the sun. And these hills face pretty much north. So yeah, there was a rope tow, and I think I mentioned this earlier, but I remember climbing up that hill on the west side of the cable tow, or the rope tow, with my dad, in order to pack it so we could get them to start the rope tow. If they didn't start the rope tow, the hill was groomed by hand packing people. That was in probably 1958.
Okay, so was that original rope tow basically up this?
Yeah, exactly up that.
Okay, and did it go all the way to the top at that time?
Yeah, it did.
Okay.
I think it was the same rope went all the way up, but you had to stop halfway up because the terrain did not allow for easily building rope tows, because rope tows have to be a little bit of a haul, because the rope drags on the ground, and eventually it just wears its way through the snow to the dirt and just ruins the rope and whatever. Complicated stuff. But yeah, it went to the top of the hill, and that was it. There was no other tow on that property, as I recall, until sometime later.
So what year are you recalling? Like late 50s, around early 60s?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And at that time, do you remember ever skiing there before Valley Shush was established?
Yes. I say that advisedly because I didn't keep notes, but I know that in January 1960, Harold, your dad, and my dad, Lloyd, were skiing at Twin Hearts over the other side of Kate's Peak when we first came up with the idea of, building a ski hill in the Hockley Valley. So I had already skied at Cedar Springs some. I don't know the dates, and I probably never will, but it would be at the latest 1960 winter, probably one or maybe 2 winters before that.
Okay.
When we were, Dad and I were skiing up in the valley. We had already skied in Quebec before that, or about that time. So we were, skiers.
Right.
And just happened into this little ski hill, really nice little hill.
Do you remember any names of the folks back then that were in charge, or any of that kind of stuff?
For sure. I remember a guy named Ernie Smith, who was the manager for years and years and years. Very gracious, nice guy. He had a very problematic stutter, but he knew how to do what he had to do. And he had built downhill. The road, the laneway in there was quite long and slowly rising, but he had built a little stack wall house just at the corner of the property. If you go down the laneway, yeah, right around there where some buildings are now, but that stack wall building, no, it's back past your boundary line. Yeah, right in there. He had built this little building. Well, a bunch of people probably built it because it was kind of the place where, you know, the group of members that were, you know, stalwart hung out on weekends and they could stay overnight. I remember Ernie and his wife, I probably hung out in that building some early on, like in the winter of 1960, maybe as early as that. So there's a whole bunch of buildings there now. That's where, whatever, that's the bottom of the chairlift, actually. I had nothing to do with that chairlift.
Yeah. So you said his name was Ernie Smith?
Yeah.
Okay.
He was the manager for years.
And anybody else that you recall name-wise from back then?
Well, the fellow whose wife ran the kitchen, I'll think of their name. He was the guy who owned or ran that little John Deere bulldozer that was the original groomer there. Oh, Muriel, I'll think of it. But they lived just on the other side of the Case Peak. They lived right across, you know, very close to that. They were local people, but they were employed, you know, to make people happy. So Muriel and her husband, I should know his name, but whatever, it's disappeared for now. They were they were the mainstays. They kept the place going because all these other people were from Hamilton.
As far as like the people that migrated from the Cedar Springs and Burlington or whatever, Hamilton, is that what you're talking about?
Well, yeah, I mean, Cedar Springs was a Hamilton outfit.
Yeah. Okay. So how about the evolution? So as the years went by, do you remember when they got rid of the rope tow, and I'm assuming they went to a T-bar? Was that the evolution as far as their runs that or ski lifts?
Okay, so the story goes this way. When Valley Shifts began in the winter of 1960-61, we had purchased a pommel from Europe. It was the first non-rope tow in the Hockley Valley. And that got everybody's attention, and people were saying, wow, we got to get something bigger and better. Soon after that, Cedar Springs bought a T-bar from Hall Ski Lift Company in Watertown, New York. I think it was new. I didn't see it go up, but we were busy building our own place nearby. Anyway, that was the second non-rope tow ski lift. And shortly after that, Doug Frid got his, which is a separate story. And of course, we had the pommel lift, which is it didn't have quite the capacity that the T-bars had, but you know, it was a modern, you know, non-rope tow, and rope tows were, you know, they were hard on your gloves, if nothing else, and hard on your body, and T-bars were a whole lot easier to get out on.
Yeah. Did that T-bar, did they basically just so where the rope tow was, they basically took the rope tow down and put the T-bar up in that exact location?
Yep.
Okay.
As far as I can tell. I mean, there might have been some bulldozing went on there, but T-bars were a little bit more flexible than rope tows in terms of the terrain you could cover with them.
Okay.
They were quite restricted at the very top because the property they owned was just barely at the top of the hill, and the neighbor Isaac Manecci, after a couple or three, or I don't know when, he sold them a little bit of land so they could get their upper terminal up there. Anyway, that's another story.
Well, that's we're talking like right down here, right?
Yeah, that they bought a little chunk of land from him.
So I'm assuming that property line probably ran straight down here.
Yep.
And then they let them cut.
Left of that is another story, but yeah, they were always short of land on that side of their ski hill.
Okay. So that essentially let them get right to the top of this train right here.
And that trail down from there to the chalet was really a nice trail. There was a trail there called Arnold Thomas, and he was a principal involved in that. I don't know that I ever met Arnold, but I remember the name Arnold Thomas because I just remember it, and I skied on Arnold Thomas's trail. I think
Okay.
that was the name of that main trail. See that little diversion on the left side of the property? They probably bought that from the owner about the same time they got a bit from the farmer at the top of the hill.
Yeah. So this
Quite constricted by property boundaries.
yeah. So this where the rope tow / T-bar went right up here, and then
Exactly.
by allowing this little, actually, I think it was probably over here, but that allowed them to get to the very top.
Yeah, well, they got to the top with the rope tow, but the T-bar required a bit more room at the top. You had to, whatever, it's complicated, but they needed more room for a T-bar than they did for a rope tow.
Was I'm assuming for like I'm thinking of the unloading. So with a T-bar, you basically get off and the lift continues and goes around the bowl wheel.
Right.
So you needed more space where the skiers got off.
Well, yeah, you had to get off in a situation where once you let go of the T, you had to go downhill, either right or left to one or another ski trail. And then the bar, which was often swinging because people didn't really know how to let go of it, it had to be contained and then go a little farther, in vertical mode, not wildly swinging, and then around the bowl wheel and back down. So there's more space involved. Whereas with the rope tow, you just let go at the top and that was it. The rope went up and turned around and came back and you were on your own.
Okay. As far as the early days with the rope tow, and then when they got the T-bar, if we start off here at the top of the hill, was all this terrain here available for skiing?
Well, that was it. The one trail to the west of the T-bar, well, I'll call it Arnold Thomas. They would know for sure. And then the one, to the east of the T-bar was very steep at the top and really nice at the, on down below. And farther over, there was this one that was like, it was really steep terrain. And you could get off the T-bar and turn left and go along the top of the hill, really close to the neighbor's property. And you go down this trail called the Laundry Chute, of all things. I don't know how they came up with that name, but I remember the Laundry Chute, and it was really steep at the top, not much at the bottom. But that would be the third trail, one west and two east, and then you could go a little farther off to the right and going eventually towards Kate's Peak. But those lines you've got on your map there are much more recent than the original rope tow T-bar era.
Right. As far as the evolution then, so did they ever have snowmaking that you recall?
Oh yeah, my dad sold them some snowmaking equipment, but that was after the second T-bar was installed.
So where let's stop there. Where was the second
You can see a
T-bar?
line there on your map from the chalet or well, from the bottom terminal, a straight line right up to the southeast. There's a straight line there through way back, back towards the Laundry Chute. Yeah, there you are. You're at the bottom. That's the bottom terminal of a T-bar that my dad negotiated with a place up at North Bay called anyway, he bought a used T-bar because he knew all these guys and he sold them T-bar. I remember helping install it, and I even skied a bit on it, but I did some grooming at that time. So that trail system to the right, that's it. Yeah, it was really quite nice. And they did a bunch of bulldozing. I knew a guy who died underneath a bulldozer on making a ski trail there.
Really?
Yep.
So I'm assuming it was some type of accident.
He was bulldozing with his little bulldozer. He was a farmer from nearby, but he did something wrong, I think, and the whole thing turned over and he ended up underneath it and nobody found him for a day or so, but he died there.
Oh, wow. Yeah, so you can see this train over here is pretty steep then where they put that other T-bar.
Yeah, well, yeah, it is very steep at the top. You know, depending on how you built the trail,
Right.
it's steep and not so steep and then whatever. I mean, the design of ski trails depended almost entirely on the terrain, but you could bulldoze the heck out of something and change it. It was quite a nice place to ski. That T-bar, that was a Hall T-bar from, oh, I should know the name of the place. I'll think of it. Up just south of North Bay.
Okay. And what year do you think that second T-bar was put in?
Ooh, after my daughter was born, she was a little kid. I have pictures of her at that time. This would have been the 70s, sometime mid 70s, maybe.
Okay. Do you remember as far as the snowmaking? I'm assuming that your dad probably had it at Valley Shush and they probably saw the SMI snowmaking and then your dad, talked to them about that and then sold them to some snowmaking.
Well, I don't know that it's quite that simple, but my recollection is a number of years later when I ended up managing the place for a winter. By that time, they had several SMI units. I remember using them for a winter. I don't remember other makes of snowmaking equipment, but to be fair, they had very little water to make snow there. It did have electricity because the lifts were always run on electricity from the Hockley Road. But the water problem got worse and worse because they had a little pond, a tiny, tiny river of water right about there where your cursor is.
Yep.
So by the time I got there, they were really starved for water.
Was that their only source of water? Was this little pond?
Yep.
Oh, wow.
Well,
Okay.
there was a spring right at the bottom of the T-bar, which supplied the water. It was a valley, and the natural drainage provided a little bit of water, not really enough.
Okay. So
When I
that
was
was,
there, we were always, water conservation. We couldn't do much about, controlling the amount of water that went into the pond, but the pond was always, not adequate.
right.
So we made snow and we made as much as we could. I'm trying to remember whether there was some other type of snowmaking equipment, but I know that when I was there, we were using SMI equipment.
Do you remember like how many guns they ended up purchasing?
Probably only a couple.
Okay. I was gonna say with that limited water supply, they probably.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Now, with that water supply, how did they have like so from that pond, did they have an underground pipe that ran to a certain spot, or how did you get the water to it?
It ran up to the bottom of the T-bar, I'm going to say, and then up, either up the T-bar line or adjacent to it. So you could make snow at the top of the T-bar
Okay.
all the way down those really important trails. But basically, kind of like Valley Shush, you made snow on Murray's Run, and if the other runs got some, that was, gravy. So their system was not unlike a lot of others, very pragmatic. But again, when I was there, that was the time at which a lot of ski resorts were saying, how the heck are we going to survive in this very competitive business? So I think that's when the private club became the private club. And a lot of money was put into it to get a pipeline all the way down to the Nottawasaga River, which is a long way down that laneway.
Also, they did at one time run a pipe or a water line all the way down to the river.
Oh yeah, and a pump house down at the river.
Okay.
I mean, that was probably the winter after I was there, or maybe 2 years after I was there. But I know my dad was always selling them what he could, and he probably sold them, I don't know how much, because I really was not all that much involved in his, the details of his business. And I was not involved in putting that pipeline in, but I saw it happen.
Okay.
It was a long way down to the river. It was very expensive, and you know, three-phase power at the river and pump house and crossing the Hockley Road must have cost a fortune to do it.
Yeah. And I imagine they probably had to have a fairly big pump to push the water that far.
Well, our pump at Valley Shust, which was a similar length and vertical distance, was, I think it was 75 horsepower at the river. And I don't know if we had a booster pump, but it was a really costly endeavor, really costly.
Yeah.
Just to install, let alone run.
Now, was that pump an electric pump, electric motor?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So, some ski hills had diesel power, but it was only because they couldn't get electricity. They were, you know, more remote than this.
Gotcha.
This is history that goes back, but when we went there, there was an endeavor to get electricity and a more adequate road down the Hockley Valley, and those things kind of went hand in hand. And you know, they both succeeded, but you know, with the local pushing, you know, from us and others. I mean, there was electricity when we started there. We had three-phase power from day one, but it was, you know, it's sort of a separate story maybe. But yeah, the electricity was a huge expense.